Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome once again to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we've just gotten a fresh shipment of the good stuff in from Belagust and Nogrod. Thank Owly for the dwarves. They don't disappoint.
I'll answer that with a Khazad menu and a West of Hal, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and since I'm opening today with the battle cry of the dwarves, I guess I'm joined by the Legolas to my Gimli. Still owes me a trip to the Glittering Caves, Alan Sisto.
So I've gone from being the Ranger and King of the United Realms of Gondor and Arnor to one of the mightiest of the Valar to a Sindar pretty boy with a bow? Thanks a lot, Sean. Really appreciate it. See if you get that trip to Aglarond. Well, folks, we are going back to Valinor tonight to see what the Valar have been up to since Morgoth and Ungoliant skipped Bale. They're going to do a little craft project in this episode, and Arda is going to get a little brighter in Chapter 11 of The Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor.
You know, it strikes me that this is the origin story of Gollum's two most hated things in the world besides himself.
Curse the white face!
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Ah, man, I'm going to have to... How I don't know how he did that for hours and hours.
Andy Serkis did that for
Andy
hours.
Serkis, the man is amazing.
I think I read something about him having like a special juice, like a juice blend that he had concocted.
You know what? I should probably get... I don't doubt it at all, given what he had to do with his throat.
Mm-hmm.
But
well,
anyway,
you got a little time before we get to The Hobbit.
Thank goodness. Well, if you think I'm doing that for The Hobbit, we got to figure something out. I mean, I'm going to do some characterizations. We'll see. There will be a lot of reading here tonight because it's a short chapter filled with some really wonderful prose, and we want to spend some time enjoying it because there probably won't be as much to discuss. But first, Sean, does Barliman have anything in his bag for us tonight?
He does, yeah. We've got a couple of questions, kind of a two-parter sort of from Bernat in Barcelona. He wrote in saying, looking at the next podcast, I was wondering whether there is a relation between the Luthien and Beren storyline and the Grimm brothers' tales. It brings it up to me, especially when she uses her hair to escape dangers. Is there any chance some of these big stories are inspired by them, meaning, some of those old fairy tales?
Brothers, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I definitely think there's some inspiration. I've never read anywhere that Tolkien was specifically inspired by the Grimms. And I actually looked. There's only one direct reference to the Grimms in his letters where he actually talks about how The Hobbit had started as, I think he says, a comic tale among conventional and inconsistent Grimm's fairy tale dwarves.
Yes, I do remember that.
And I mean, of course, we don't need that to know that he knew their work. I mean, it's the Grimm brothers, of course.
Right.
And I've always
or the Brothers Grimm, as you might know them.
Or the Brothers Grimm, right, yeah. And I always assume that when he talks about, there's that part on fairy stories where he talks about fairy tales being Baudelarized.
I had to look that up. Yes, I remember.
Might say, we might say the word sanitized or, something like that these days. Censored or something. Yeah. I mean, I've always thought he's talking about the Grimm fairy tales because, those have some pretty horrific stuff in them.
Some really dark stuff, yes.
Pretty much any adaptation you're going to see is usually going to be pretty Baudelarized.
Things I won't tell my 4-year-old, that's for sure.
Right, for sure, yeah. Not going to read my kids those stories. So
we'll read in Silence of the Lambs.
Right, exactly. But so there's that. And I mean, there's also the fact that a lot of people don't know this, but the Brothers Grimm are actually philologists.
Mm-hmm. They were Germans. Pretty much all Germans were philologists in the 19th in that time.
Is that how it worked? Yeah.
It sure seems that way, doesn't it? All the philologists were Germans.
It really does, yeah. I mean, their work on folklore was very sort of linguistically driven, kind of like it was for Tolkien. So he definitely knew that they were kindred spirits. So I guess the short answer is, probably some inspiration, but I think that Tolkien especially would kind of warn us against looking too closely for parallels.
Certainly.
I mean, if you wanted to say like, well, Luthien uses her hair to escape dangers, maybe that kind of makes her like Rapunzel or something. Yeah, there's some elements of similarity there, but as Tolkien always said, don't look too closely to the bones. Right. Meaning the inspirations, but just enjoy the soup. Enjoy the story itself.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't mean that we can't pick up on similarities. It's fun to do that. I love doing it. But
yeah, we've been doing it all along.
That's right, exactly. It's part of what brings us, makes us keep going back into these texts. But I think what makes the stories worth reading is the differences rather than the similarities.
That's a good point, and I agree completely. It's not, and he talked about something like that on Fairy Stories when he was talking about origins and things like that.
Yeah.
And how, this story shows up in 3 different cultures except for difference A, B, and C. Well, then they're not the same story, and that's really important.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And what makes it different is what makes it, good and enjoyable.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
I agree.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So you said it was a 2-parter. What else did he have to ask?
So we got another one from him, and I guess this one is actually a 2-parter too. So it's kind of 3 in there.
Lucky guy. We answered 3 questions in one episode.
I know. He had some good ones. So he said, also, I know you already spoke about this part of the Silmarillion, but I've had these 2 questions in my mind for a while now. I thought maybe Arda, as it was during the spring of Arda, so that's back in chapter 1 of the Quenta Silmarillion, is like
Time of the Lamps, right?
Right, exactly. I always thought it was like the Pangea that was the geography of the Earth, which over time developed into Aman and Middle Earth, just like ours. Kind of the idea of multiple continents. And then the second part of this question, and adding to my earlier question of the Grimm brothers, don't you get the feeling that the Hall of Mandos is very much like Valhalla? Elves and supposedly dwarves dwell there once dead until the end of the world, or the Ragnarok, as it is in Norse mythology. Every time an elf dies, I can't help but think of it.
So, like you said, it's a bit of a 2-parter, or really a 3-parter. Let me tackle this idea of Arda as Pangea first.
Please do.
I should preface this by saying that Tolkien really wanted his mythology to be consistent with truth, as we'll see when we get into tonight's discussion.
That's true, yeah.
Because of this goal or this desire, he had a few concerns about this chapter in particular, and we'll get to that. He hoped to reconcile his mythological creation of the sun and moon in a more scientifically accurate way, but never managed it. That's for later, but I say that to say that the idea of him trying to come up with something that fit with reality certainly is something that he tried to do.
He wasn't trying to intentionally deny something that we knew to be scientifically accurate.
Right, that's correct. But with that said, modern science accepts plate tectonics and continental drift and this idea of a global uniform or unified continent known as Pangea. That concept wasn't widely accepted until the mid-'60s. I mean, it does have its source back in the 20s and 30s, but it was nothing more than a crazy fringe theory. Really, until at least the 50s, and then it wasn't until the mid-60s that it gained widespread approval, widespread acceptance of the scientific community.
I guess it usually does take a little time for these things to really, to disseminate throughout the community. Yeah, especially if something that different.
Hugely different than what others had believed until then. But of course, mid-60s, that's long after Tolkien had conceived of this idea of Arda, the Isle of Almarin, and the lamps.
That's true.
And the perfect symmetry of the Earth before Melkor's assault on the lamps. So on that one, I'd have to say no. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's any similarities or inspiration from the notion of Pangea or plate tectonics, because that was just simply a notion that Tolkien wouldn't have been aware of when he first created the mythology.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I mean, I never really thought of the similarity myself, and you mentioned the symmetry of the Earth, and I mean that's a good point. We're told that Arda was symmetrical. I'm not sure there's anything in there that says that it was a single continent.
No, well, and there certainly wasn't anything symmetrical about Pangea. So I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah.
If Arda was symmetrical and might have been multiple continents, Pangea was one continent and definitely not symmetrical.
Right. Yeah. Good points. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as for that's good. Yeah, I think as for his thoughts about the Halls of Mandos and Valhalla, I mean, again, there's some similarities, but I think there's also some important differences. One of the things that I think about is, Valhalla is really a place of feasting. It's a place of celebration.
Yeah.
Mandos always seems to me kind of somber. It's kind of like if you've ever read like the Odyssey or the Aeneid, and you see like this very just kind of somber, dark underworld, or even like Dante's Limbo from the Inferno. I guess that's what I bring to it, is those are stories that I love, and then I know that's what I see in Mandos. It's just kind of a
Limbo,
quiet,
certainly.
somber
that
place.
Really seems to be the closest one, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a quiet, somber place, sort of kind of a waiting place, really, as opposed to this sort of
that's
nonstop
what they're
party.
called. They're called the Halls of Waiting. So
that's true. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's different from Valhalla, and I mean, to go to Valhalla, if I'm not mistaken, you need to die a noble death. You need to die in battle.
Yeah.
Whereas all elves go to Mandos after death, if they don't deny the summons. We talked
Exactly.
about that back in episode 10.
The ones who become kind of wanderless spirits, right?
Right,
Wandering
right. So there's
spirits,
not right, exactly. So there's no judgment involved in entering Mandos, just in leaving it, actually, to be rehoused if you're an elf.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
Again, I think he was inspired by lots of things, but and I'm sure Valhalla was one of them. But again, I think it's the differences, not the similarities, that make it notable.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah. I mean, certainly he was well aware of all those Old Norse myths, and so Valhalla would have been something he was well aware of. It seems to me that those similarities are pretty few and far between. You've touched on some of the differences, but they're really key. You talked about all elves, as long as they obey the summon, go to Mandos. Only the heroic warriors went to Valhalla. It seems to me that Tolkien wanted to kind of eschew that sort of violent death-seeking that Valhalla entailed.
Yeah.
That wasn't glorified like it would have been in Norse mythology.
Good word, by the way, eschew.
Eschew. Bless you. Yeah, need a Kleenex?
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Yeah, and Mandos, you talked about there being judgment in leaving Mandos. With Valhalla, that judgment takes place before. Only the worthy enter it. It's not a place of judgment. Judgment doesn't happen once you're there. Judgment happens before you get there.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing really is, we talked about the place of contemplation, of course, as well, not feasts and fighting. But the biggest difference is in the nature of the elves themselves. Remember back in our discussion, I think we talked about it on a couple of different occasions. We talked about it with Finwë and Muriel, but we also talked about it a lot back in episode 10 about the gift of death to men. Mm-hmm. We talked about the elvish afterlife, for lack of a better word. And one thing we found in exploring the Athrobeth was that elves viewed the Fea and Hroa, the spirit and the body, for appropriate words, as two parts of the whole, and that to be cut off from one's body long term would be viewed as a very unnatural thing. It was in their nature to be a unified being with both Fea and Hroa. So the hope was that one would spend as little time as possible in Mandos and then be rebodied.
So they don't want it to be a Valhalla. They don't want it to be a nonstop party, nonstop feast.
They want to get out. They want to get back. Yeah. Muriel was an exception to that. Feanor is an exception. He might want to be rebodied, but too bad. So while the
spoilers,
I know, big spoiler. While the dwarves may be waiting in halls set apart, remember that's what was said in the Some Say comment back in chapter 2.
Right.
The only elf who has to wait for that is Feanor. All the others are going to get new bodies and go back to Valinor. Glorfindel ended up going back all the way to Middle Earth, but most of them go back to Valinor.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, I would say the differences really, really outweigh the similarities in that regard.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't even touch on the differences between Ragnarok and the Dagor Dagorath, but that's since that's not even canonical.
That's probably a discussion. Yeah, exactly.
That's a discussion for another day.
For another podcast.
For another podcast. Plus, we have a discussion of our own to get to, so we'll move on. But Bernat, thanks for those questions. We really appreciate them, and I'm sorry if our answers didn't quite line up with what you'd hoped to hear, but we thought they were fascinating questions and definitely worth answering.
Very good questions. Thank you, Bernat.
So we're going to start tonight with the Silent Council of the Valar here. Let me see. Let me pull up our text.
Yeah, you want to take the first passage here?
Mm-hmm. It is told that after the flight of Melkor, the Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom. But they were not idle, as Feanor declared in the folly of his heart. For the Valar may work many things with thought rather than with hands, and without voices, in silence, they may hold counsel one with another. Thus they held vigil in the night of Valinor, and their thought passed back beyond Ea and forth to the end. Yet neither power nor wisdom assuaged their grief, and the knowing of evil in the hour of its being. And they mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Feanor, of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. For Feanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valor, in endurance, in beauty, in understanding, in skill, in strength, and in subtlety alike, of all the children of Iluvatar, and a bright flame was in him. The works of wonder for the glory of Arda that he might otherwise have wrought, only Manwë might in some measure conceive. And it was told by the Vanyar who held vigil with the Valar, that when the messengers declared to Manwë the answers of Feanor to his heralds, Manwë wept and bowed his head. But at that last word of Feanor, that at the least the Noldor should do deeds to live in song forever, he raised his head, as one that hears a voice far off, and he said, "So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought, for the price could be no other. Thus, even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been." But Mando said, "And yet remain evil. To me shall Feanor come soon." Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why did I let you read that passage?
Because you've got dibs on like
Good
an
one.
entire chapter at the end of the Quint of Silmarillion.
That is true. That is true. That's a good passage. There's so much there.
Oh, there's a ton of richness there, isn't there?
Yeah. Where do we start?
Well, I think just start at the very beginning, right? We talked about how that is a good place to start.
Good place to start.
I think we see first the reminder that Feanor's comment really was declared in the folly of his heart. It was
they were not
for him.
idle. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Foolish for him to think that they just sat idle in their grief. That was not at all what the Valar were doing.
Yeah.
Not surprising that Feanor would think that. He's very bold. He doesn't hesitate, and he sees any hesitation as weakness. But he didn't realize that they were still working quietly.
Yeah, and it seems like Feanor's gotten to the point in his career where he only respects one kind of action.
Immediate, visceral action.
Right. Exactly. Reaction. One might say. Yeah.
Excellent point. We see, of course, the reminder that they can accomplish things in thought, that they are able to telepathically communicate with each other. We've talked about that before. I didn't even catch this when I was preparing the notes, but their thought passed back beyond Ea and forth to the end. So they're looking.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. They're looking to the past. They're looking to the future.
Yeah, they're looking back before the beginning of creation, back when the music had been sung, and all the way to the end. But
they really are being contemplative here. Really are thinking through. Yeah. Okay, what has happened and what is going to happen?
What are we supposed to do now?
What are we supposed to do about it? Yeah.
And I'm sure there's, a lot of concerns in their own. Did we do the wrong thing in bringing them here now? Was this? Yeah. Was this an error? So, but none of this contemplation, makes them feel any better. The pain, the grief is just so deep. I love this line: "The knowing of evil in the hour of its being." That's more than intellectual knowledge. That's that personal knowledge of evil in the hour of its being. It's a deep knowledge. It's an experiential knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. But boy, the big one really is the next part, isn't it? The marring of Feanor.
The marring of Feanor. That's an important word.
Crucial.
Yeah. I mean, remember, this is the word Tolkien uses to refer to Arda's corruption by Melkor. And I mean, we've talked about it several times. Arda marred. It's an Arda that is not what it should have been, and that's what Feanor is. It's a Feanor. This is a version of Feanor that should never have been.
That's absolutely right. And that quote.
And I love that I love the Valar are mourning for him. Yeah.
Appropriately so. I mean, what things he could have done. What amazing things he could have done. And I think it's telling that the text says that of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. Yeah. To put that in context, we're told when he kidnapped the Avari and converted them to orcs.
Turned them into orcs, yeah.
That's pretty much the description we get of that. Yeah. I'd have to look back at the exact phrasing on that, but I'll look at that while you take the next bit. But I think we were given something very similar to how that was. Here we go. It may be was the vilest deed of Melkor and the most hateful to Iluvatar.
Okay.
So,
but this is certainly one of the most. Yeah. But this is one of the most evil, and who knows? I mean, is it a top 5? Is it a top 10? It doesn't really matter. No, but the point is that the marring of this one figure who could have been so great, is in the same ballpark as the creation of orcs, or I should say that the twisting of orcs. Yeah, that's big, and and it's because Feanor had so many gifts. Feanor had so much potential,
and the mightiest in all of those things.
Yeah.
And yet, it's just a reminder that when you
and only Manwë might, in some measure, conceive what he might have been capable of.
That's saying something.
Wow.
it made me think, though. It made me realize, Fëanor has made the mightiest in all of these things. What do we know about Melkor?
That Melkor was he who arises to might, and he had a part of all the gifts of his brethren.
All the gifts, and he was by far the most powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a reminder that with those gifts comes a very strong temptation to fall, maybe even a greater likelihood of fall. And certainly the fall is more catastrophic, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah. The fall is greater because you start from a greater height when it happens. And, I do kind of like the idea that, it's one of the works of Melkor. It is of the works of Melkor. Melkor is ultimately responsible for this world. I don't want to get into a whole question of Fëanor's free will, because I certainly think he had it.
Of course.
But Melkor is the reason that Arda is marred in the first place, and so Melkor has a part in this.
Yeah.
And
I'll just quash any notion that he didn't have any free will by saying this. One thing that we do know about Iluvatar is that he's just, and one thing that we know about Mandos is that he seeks justice. It would be unjust to hold somebody in Mandos forever if they're not morally culpable for their actions.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
That's the thing. Moral culpability and the exercise of free will go hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other.
Well, and I think that even in one of his letters, I don't have it in front of me, but I'm sure I've seen Tolkien refer to the elves as creatures of free will. I mean,
yes, they are.
Fëanor definitely. I didn't mean to imply that. A different kind of
free will than men.
Certainly, yeah. And,
I just know that the Fëanor apologist will take what you said and said, see, Fëanor didn't,
well, that's a good point. Yeah, no, that's a good point. No, Fëanor is absolutely
They'll blame it on Melkor.
Fëanor is absolutely to blame for his own actions. Yeah. And, but it's a symptom. It's one of many symptoms of this marred world.
Arda marred. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I do like that the Valar mourn for him just as much as they do for the loss of the trees. Man, just a heartbreak thing. And yet you see Manwë get this little bit of, that's my boy. He's still there's still a little bit of, I don't know about pride, but a little bit of, there's got to be something that's going to be redeemed here. There's got to be some good that's going to come out of this.
Right.
And he lifts his head, but Mandos is like, look, it's still evil.
Yeah.
This whole idea, though, that Manwë talks about even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been. They might as well have put Spabimi right there in the text.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
That's just another reminder of the sovereignty of Iluvatar taking the bad thing, the evil of Fëanor's actions, and creating good out of it.
Well, and that's a bit of Tolkien's hope, isn't it? The idea that something good can come out of something bad.
Well, that's the eucatastrophe.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's still evil.
I was going to say, we're still where we land, isn't it? Evil is still evil. It can be made good things can come from it because of the sovereign hand of Iluvatar, but evil still requires a judgment and a penalty.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, it's, one of the things that we've talked about is we had conversations with people about Fëanor is so important to the book. He kind of is the catalyst for for so much that happens. But,
totally.
Yes, he is. A story of good and evil needs people to do bad things.
That's true.
It needs bad guys. I know not everybody agrees with us that Fëanor is totally a bad guy, but I mean, a story of good and evil needs villains. That doesn't make them less villainous. It doesn't make their actions less villainous.
No.
Melkor is Melkor is very important to the story too, isn't he?
That's true.
So, that's kind of that idea of evil still remains evil.
Exactly. We should at least acknowledge that even though we've been pretty hard on Fëanor, and I believe justly so, like the Valar, we mourn for that marring. I mean,
absolutely.
What kind of an amazing history would the Noldor have had if Fëanor had been able to just rein in his pride?
Yeah.
But you found something from Dr. Verlyn Flieger that I thought was really relevant to this, didn't you?
I did, yeah. When I was reading this about the idea that good comes from evil, but the evil remains evil. I've actually been reading Verlyn Flieger's book, Splintered Light, Logos and Language in Tolkien's World.
That is an excellent book.
It is
Really
such a good book. Yeah, it really is good. And there's a line she has in here about light and darkness, which I really loved. It's I've got it right here, actually. It's the presence and power of the dark are among the most effective elements in his mythology. Speaking of Tolkien, of course.
Right.
For his vision of the light rides on the dark as sound rides on silence, as spoken words ride on the pauses between them. Each needs the other. The shadow defines and thereby reveals the light, as the brightness of the light sharpens the shadow. It's it's beautiful wording, by the way.
Exactly. So,
but the idea of, the light rides on the dark. And I think, what I get from that is the darkness and the light, both are needed in the world. But from a narrative perspective, the purpose of the dark is to help the light shine brighter. I think she even says in the next paragraph that, despair is needed to give definition to hope and so forth. That's all true. We need the light and the dark. It's sometimes hard to recognize one unless you've seen the other.
Well,
but
yeah,
that
they
does
give a contrast, don't they?
Right, they give the contrast, but that doesn't change the fact that the darkness is still the darkness, and that the light is what Tolkien consistently says we should yearn for.
Yeah. Oh, always.
And that also reminded me of a little bit of Mythopoeia, which there's that line in Mythopoeia.
Going back to episode 2.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. There's that line in there, and of evil, this alone is dreadly certain. Evil is.
Evil is. Yes. I remember that. I should probably see if I can get some more context for that, but that is a great line. That this alone is the only thing that's certain about evil is that it is.
Is that evil is.
That it exists.
It is. It is there. With. Yeah. And I know that these things are not, these passages I'm bringing in, they're not saying exactly the same thing, but I think if you look at them all in context of each other, you see that there is good, there is evil in Tolkien's world, and we need them both. But again, as Mando says, the evil is still evil, and that's why we celebrate the good.
Absolutely. Well, this talk about Arda Mard actually reminded me of a conversation we had a few episodes back when the Valar were debating the Statute of Finwë. If you remember, Manwë made this distinction. He was talking about justice, but in that he was talking about Arda Mard. He said, in this matter, and he was talking about, of course, Finwë and Miriel, you must not forget that you deal with Arda Mard, out of which you brought the Eldar. Neither must ye forget that in Arda Mard, justice is not healing. So, and that really does apply here. We're talking about what we've got to do to Feanor, really. That when Mando says, to me shall Feanor come soon, justice isn't healing. And Manwë goes on to say that healing cometh only by suffering and patience. And I'm going to try to get rid of the archaic language just to make it a little easier for folks. And it makes no demand. That is, healing makes no demand, not even for justice. But this is the part that really speaks. Justice works only within the bonds of things as they are, accepting the marring of Arda. And therefore, though justice is itself good, and desireth no further evil, it can but perpetuate the evil that was, and doth not prevent it from the bearing of fruit in sorrow. That, it may have been relevant for Finwë and Miriel, but it's doubly relevant for Feanor here.
Yeah.
That the justice that's going to happen it cannot help but perpetuate the evil that was, and certainly the justice isn't going to prevent the bearing of fruit in sorrow. In fact, we'll see plenty of bearing of fruit in sorrow over the next, dozen chapters or so.
There's going to be,
that's the rest of the
people
book.
People who have read this book know that, there's comeuppance for Feanor coming very soon.
Yeah.
But it's not going to end the suffering.
No, that doesn't stop.
It is not going to, the redemption is not going to come right away. There's going to be a lot of darkness to come.
Yeah. That was it was something when you talk about Arda Mard that I remembered that and had to go pull that up. But that's...
no, that was cool, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely fits. So we want to move on from there to the last fruit and flower.
Yep.
I think you've got this one, right?
Yeah, I'll take the next passage. This is right after the break. But when at last the Valar learned that the Noldor had indeed passed out of Aman and were come back into Middle-earth, they arose and began to set forth in deeds those counsels which they had taken in thought for the redress of the evils of Melkor. Then Manwë bade Yavanna and Nienna to put forth all their powers of growth and healing, and they put forth all their powers upon the trees. But the tears of Nienna availed not to heal their mortal wounds, and for a long while Yavanna sang alone in the shadows. Yet even as hope failed and her song faltered, Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Laurelin a single fruit of gold. These Yavanna took, and then the trees died, and their lifeless stems stand yet in Valinor, a memorial of vanished joy. But the flower and the fruit Yavanna gave to Aule, and Manwë hallowed them, and Aule and his people made vessels to hold them, and preserve their radiance, as is said in the Silmarillion, the song of the sun and moon. These vessels the Valar gave to Varda, that they might become lamps of heaven, outshining the ancient stars being nearer to Arda. And she gave them power to traverse the lower regions of Ilmen, and set them to voyage upon appointed courses, above the girdle of the earth, from the west unto the east, and to return.
Wow. Well, now you know why you gave me the first paragraph, because that's pretty beautiful stuff, too.
Because I got that one, yeah.
Yeah. The last fruit. The last fruit.
Teamwork. See,
yeah,
there's teamwork in the book, and there's teamwork between you and me. We each
there you go. It's just like the lamps, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yavanna takes these things, gives them to Aule. Manwë hallows them. Aule makes vessels. It's teamwork again. I love that. And
Absolutely.
teamwork between Yavanna and Nienna in order to get these last bits to bloom.
Yeah, I mean, Yavanna is singing alone, but, Nienna is right there beside her.
Crying.
Sorry.
but
I think, we've talked so many times about the power of grief. I mean, we even saw it in the last episode where, even Uinen's grief, she's not even Nienna, but even Uinen's grief made the sea rise up in wrath against the Noldor. Grief is powerful. And even if Nienna may not seem like she's doing much, she's not singing or anything, but I have always felt like Nienna's sort of propping Yavanna up there.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. And even though I may mock her consistent crying, you're absolutely right. The power of grief, the power of compassion, Nienna is immensely more powerful than I think a first reader would recognize. I didn't realize until several reads through just how relevant and powerful Nienna really is.
I agree. Yeah.
So definitely more teamwork. So they get the flower and the fruit. They give it to Aule, who made the vessels. Manwë hallows them.
Yeah.
Again, just amazing amount of teamwork. But
yeah, and so just to be clear, so the sun is going to be this last fruit of Laurelin,
right?
And the moon is this last flower of Telperion. We'll get into a little bit more about how that worked.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few episodes ago, I kind of coyly hinted at the fact that Telperion and Laurelin were associated with the moon and sun. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
I was just kind of like trying to tiptoe around it because I didn't want to spoil this because this is one of my favorite chapters.
Yep.
Obviously, anybody who's already read this knew where I was going with this, but
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to start with a little bit about the cosmography here, really.
Okay.
So we see here that the sun and moon are closer to Arda than the ancient stars,
right?
Which I take to mean, both the bright stars that Varda made back in Chapter 3 and the innumerable stars, which you and I both think were there before.
Yeah.
Because they were before.
Yeah, there's no reason to think stars. They weren't. They
were there before Ea. Yeah.
Right. Well, they weren't there before Ea. They were there before Arda.
Right. That's right. You're right.
Yeah.
Yep. But so the sun and moon are closer than both. They're in this lower region of Ilmen, which is the region above the air. I think it's probably what medieval called the ether or something.
Okay.
Probably like sort of the upper air.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's not the ether. I think it might be, but I could be wrong. But it's just kind of imagine it being sort of the upper air. They're just sort of just beyond the atmosphere.
Okay.
So they are pretty close to the Earth.
Right.
But then we get, why exactly the Valar did this.
Yeah, we're not going to read this next paragraph, but there's little bits and pieces here. If you look through there, you get two things that the Valar did. First, they're talking about the sun and the moon and why they wanted to do this. And we get 4 reasons. We see that they wanted to hinder the deeds of Melkor. And that was helpful.
Right.
I mean, it's not enough, but it's helpful. Interestingly, they remembered the Avari. They realized, hey, you know what? Our job is to care for the children of Iluvatar, not just the ones that listen to us.
Yeah.
And that means including the Avari.
Finally, I would say. I mean, because, for how long have they had no light? Yeah.
Yeah. A very, very long time. What did we figure out? That Melkor was in Mandos for 3 ages, and that was about 3,000 years.
Yeah, we did the math in the last episode, and I think I botched the math horribly. I was just listening to that, and I think I did just a horrible job with my arithmetic, but it was a really long time.
I think you did. You talked about, I don't think you did. It was like 45,000 years from the beginning of...
was that right? Okay.
I can't remember. Oh, from the trees.
Okay, yeah.
From the trees, from the creation of the trees, because that's when time started being measured. Prior to that, we have no idea how.
We have no idea, yeah.
We know time existed, we know time passed, but we don't know how much time passed.
Right.
But after the creation of the trees, the years were measured in these Valinorian years that were each...
Right.
Like 9.8 something. I truly don't remember. But it was a little less than
9.82, I think it was.
9.82 does sound right. Anyway, yeah, a little bit less than 10 years. So, yeah, it ended up being a very, very long time. But so here they remember the Avari. And then, I love this, they've just sent Mandos himself to tell them that, even the echoes of your lamentation will not come back to us. But they still don't want to utterly forsake the exiled Noldor. They
no, that's great.
Are going to show them grace. And we'll see. It made me think of the fact that even Ulmo gets more involved.
That's true. Yeah, that's
there
right.
really is never a full forsaking.
No.
Though we'll see, they do, build a security fence and don't give them the key.
Right. Yeah.
And then
the locks.
Exactly, we get one of Tolkien's brilliantly done foreshadowing. Talking about the hour of the coming of men was drawn nigh.
Yes.
So those are the 4 reasons why they wanted to do the sun and moon. And the men come into being with the with why they forbore.
Right.
They didn't want to come in and tear up the place.
So grievous had been the hurts of Middle Earth. Yeah, in the previous war. Yeah.
They changed the lands. So
right.
They were, concerned for the frailty and weakness of mortal man.
Hey, I resent that.
As a mortal man, I resent that.
As a mortal man, I resent that.
I can just see Tulkas now. He's kind of emulating Bullwinkle. Oh, don't know my own strength. Pull a rabbit out of my hat. There goes a whole continent. Anyway.
Nicely done.
I love that old cartoon, Rocky and Bullwinkle.
That
was great stuff. Yeah. Boris and Natasha, those guys. Anyway. We stray. It's mostly me, isn't it?
we all do it every once in a while.
How am I going to get a Boris and Natasha quote in? It is interesting, I find, that even Manwë doesn't know where men are going to show up.
Yeah.
Manwë doesn't know? Okay, fine. I guess you don't know.
They're not omniscient. We've talked about that.
Right. But, I mean, that means that that's something that Iluvatar didn't tell him. Yeah. And it does seem that there's a lot about man that seems hidden from the Valar. That they don't.
That's true. I mean, yeah, because we think
we'll
about
learn more in next chapter, but
we will learn more. Yeah, absolutely. And even when we looked at things like the Athrabeth, in previous episodes, there's things that, Finrod doesn't know about men because he was never told it by the Valar because the Valar didn't know.
Right.
That's a really good
mystery.
Point.
We're mysterious to the Valar.
Well, and remember, was it in Valaquenta or was it in Ainulindale where it's kind of discussed that it's because the children of Iluvatar are so mysterious to the Valar.
Yeah.
It's part of why they love us so much.
That is part of why they love them. Because we're like but unlike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
Good
cool.
stuff. So they not only sent the sun and moon, but they decided not to go after Melkor right now.
Right.
And that's all because of man. So they sent out the
but
light.
They had to do something to hinder him. And I guess that's where we get that light, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk more about that light, right? Let's go ahead and read a little bit about the moon and the sun. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and take these next couple of paragraphs here. Isil the Sheen, the Vanyar of old named the moon, flower of Telperion in Valinor. And Anar, the fire golden, fruit of Laurelin, they named the sun. But the Noldor named them also Rana, the wayward, and Vasa, the heart of fire, that awakens and consumes. For the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men and the waning of the elves, but the moon cherishes their memory. The maiden whom the Valar chose from among the Maiar to guide the vessel of the sun was named Arion, and he that steered the island of the moon was Tilion. In the days of the trees, Arion had tended the golden flowers in the gardens of Vanna, and watered them with the bright dews of Laurelin. But Tilion was a hunter of the company of Orome, and he had a silver bow. He was a lover of silver, and when he would rest, he forsook the woods of Orome, and, going into Lorien, he lay in dream by the pools of Este, in Telperion's flickering beams, and he begged to be given the task of tending forever the last flower of silver. Arion the maiden was mightier than he, and she was chosen because she had not feared the heats of Laurelin, and was unhurt by them, being from the beginning a spirit of fire, whom Melkor had not deceived nor drawn to his service. Too bright were the eyes of Arion for even the Eldar to look on, and leaving Valinor, she forsook the form and raiment which, like the Valar, she had worn there, and she was as a naked flame, terrible in the fullness of her splendor.
Wow.
Again,
there are too many beautiful passages in this chapter.
They really are. There really are. And that's why, even though this was a tough chapter, as we'll get to get some of the kind of the behind the scenes stuff, I am so glad that Christopher Tolkien included this.
Yeah.
Because there's a reason that we'll get to later why he might not have.
Yeah.
But
it's such a beautiful story, and I'm so glad he did.
Yeah. It's stunning stuff.
I love this. We'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we get to the next chapter in our next, maybe our next episode. But this idea that the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men and the waning of the elves.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about back in chapter 1. I kind of brought up the analogy between the two trees and the elves and men. Telperion being right. Like the elves and Laurelin being like men. The silver tree waxing first, and then as it fades, the golden tree starts to wax. The same thing is happening here, really. I mean, you kind of got the idea that the sun is the sign for the awakening of men. That's kind of where I got that idea from.
Yeah,
and that the moon cherishes their memory, and it is now that the sun it's about to rise for the first time,
but not before the moon.
Not before the moon.
And
exactly.
That's where
really
that symbolism comes into play even more strongly,
right.
doesn't it?
Right, exactly, yeah. The moon rises first. And so the symbolism is totally carried forward. And this is a sign that, I'll get more into this in the next chapter, but I think this is a sign that, the elves are already waning,
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's absolute. This is the beginning of their waning.
Mm-hmm. This is, sort of the beginning of the end. And kind of the rest of this book and the rest of the Legendarium is kind of the, sort of the end. But hey, more on that later.
It's a very long end. It's a nice, and it's like the mingling of the light of the trees. I mean, yes, in this case, Telperion is starting to wane, and Laurelin is beginning to wax, but it's going to take a long time before Laurelin's waxing gets to the point of exceeding Telperion as it's waning. So we get that, and
that period where they're both shining is going to be a really, really cool period, and that's why we've got so many books about it.
That's right. That's going to be those 3 ages. But let's get to the Maiar that we see here. We see Arion, a Maya of Vanna. Just a reminder, if you don't remember this, Vanna is the ever young. She's the spouse of Orome.
Right.
So these two people,
she's associated with spring and flowers and things like that. Yeah.
She's the younger sister of Yavanna. So that explains a little bit about, if I remember correctly, the text is something about all flowers spring as she passes, and open if she glances upon them. So she's, like you said, spring. And interesting, Arion served her, and Tilion served Orome. So they served Valar that were spouses.
That's true.
Not something that you see too often, but
that's a good point. Yeah.
I also caught that she was mightier than he. Remember when we got into, I think this was probably in Valaquenta, now that I think about it, that the Maiar were some less, some well nigh as great as themselves, talking about the Valar. So it's not a surprise that there's a gap in greatness. You know, we know that, who was it? Eowyn was, you know,
was like the mightiest of arms. Yeah.
Mightiest at arms of any of them. Yeah. Even of the Valar.
Right.
So, you know, we know that some of the Maiar are pretty powerful.
Yeah. And so we can certainly assume that Arion was really, really powerful, especially,
very much so.
This, this fire provides that even the Eldar could not withstand. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Well, and just the fact that she was a spirit of fire. You know, this is such a huge thing. I when I caught this, I was like, wow, wait a minute. We don't see any other Valar or Maiar that are related to fire that haven't fallen. You know,
that's true. Yeah, because
was related
Melkor.
Right. Melkor was clearly going to be, you know, that fourth elemental with Ulmo, Manwë, and Aule.
Right.
And then you get the Valar.
The Balrogs.
Right. And she's, you know, I'm. How many others were like her? Was this what the Balrogs would have been like had they remained true? Would they have been these spirits of fire that were like naked flames, terrible in the fullness of their splendor? It's just interesting. Yeah. Clearly, fire is another thing that's dangerous, just like power.
Yeah.
You know, just even Feanor's name, which is Spirit of Fire.
Right, that's true. Yeah, and he, as we've just talked about, he's got that mighty fall that he has.
I think it's really hard to be of fire and to not fall, isn't it?
It's a really good point, and so that really kind of underscores just not only the might but the virtue of Arion.
Yes.
The fact that she was able to avoid this temptation that seems to have brought down so many other spirits of fire. Maybe not all, because there may have been others. We just don't hear about them.
Exactly.
But wow, yeah, and as we'll see, Arion herself is dangerous. I mean,
very much so.
As the sun is dangerous,
Yeah, as Tilion finds out.
As Tilion finds out in maybe the next page, yeah.
Ow. Oh, man. Yeah, don't get burned, buddy.
No.
But yeah, this fire thing is really, I think that's something that I want our listeners to really kind of ponder, is realize you're not going to see many other situations where fire is associated with good.
Right.
Fire is almost never associated with good, only because I think of that inherent danger. It's it's consuming, and that's a very dangerous thing to be. And then of course you combine that with
this the Noldor's name for it, the heart of fire that awakens and consumes.
Yes.
So you got awakening, which is certainly a very good thing. And consuming, which is a dangerous
thing. Yeah.
It's sort of a double-edged sword. I mean, it's
consuming.
And I mean, obviously, we've got so many idioms and metaphors in English that
sure.
Flying too close to the sun and things like that.
Yes.
So of course, playing with fire. This idea that fire is something that is critical, necessary, important, but dangerous.
Very.
It's really, really neat.
But yeah, I couldn't help but spot that when I saw fire. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
There's
good catch. Good catch. What about Tilion?
Tilion, interesting. I love this. He spent time in Lorien. What was she in charge of? He.
Dreams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dreams and rest. Yeah.
I said she. Sorry. I don't know why, but doesn't Lorien sound like, I don't know why it sounds like a female name, but I know it's not. It's Irmo, because Namo is Mandos.
Right.
Irmo, Lorien.
It does sound like some lots of female names in English. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know. It's just every once in a while I forget. But she was in charge of dreams.
Yeah, dreams, and of course Lorien's wife Este is rest
and
healing.
What is the moon associated with?
Rest and healing,
and healing and dreams.
Yeah, and I love we actually going back to Arion, the idea that she watered the flowers in Vanna's gardens with Laurelyn's dews. So there you've got the idea that the sun is associated with growth and warmth
and plants. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
that's really cool.
Point.
And I think the word flickering, he talks about the flickering beams.
The flickering beams of Telperion, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the moon doesn't usually flicker, but, it certainly is, it changes.
That's true.
It's got phases. So it's inconstant or not constant.
I hear what you mean, yeah. Yeah. What would be the negative Constant.
I don't know.
Inconsistent. Inconsistent.
Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah, it's inconsistent. It changes. It wanes. It waxes and wanes.
Right.
The moon does.
Exactly. Very cool stuff.
And I like that he begged to be given.
Isn't that cool?
Job because it kind of makes me think that I think rightly that these jobs are sort of rewards.
Yeah.
You know,
even though they're jobs that would require being gone forever.
Big sacrifice. Yeah, I mean they're not going to get to hang out.
This is an eternal
Valinor
job.
anymore.
There's no vacation. There are no sick days. There's no time off.
It's like being like a long haul trucker. You know, you're on the road all the time.
I mean, Tillion gets days off, and Arian gets nights off, but that's it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But still, can't really have a family with that. Well, they're Maiar anyway, so they can't have a family, as we've discussed.
Unless they marry a mortal.
Right. See, it all comes back.
It does. All comes full circle.
Got to listen to us in order, folks.
Please do. Oh man, yeah, we do revisit a lot of our stuff. So if you are just picking us up, first of all, thank you, and second, please go back, but also please give us a little slack. We weren't quite as crisp those first few episodes. What do you think, Sean?
We're getting better. I'd say we're getting better, which is scary. Actually, I apologize.
Well,
this is still us better than we were at the start, but
we still have plenty of room to grow.
We still have plenty of room to grow.
Oh goodness. Well, let's get to the rising of the moon. I think you've got this one, right?
Yeah, I'll take this one. If I can get my ebook to where I'm going here. Okay. Isil was first wrought and made ready, and first rose into the realm of the stars, and was the elder of the new lights, as was Telperion of the trees.
Yep.
Then for a while the world had moonlight, and many things stirred and woke that had waited long in the sleep of Yavanna. The servants of Morgoth were filled with amazement, but the elves of the outer lands looked up in delight. And even as the moon rose above the darkness in the west, Fingolfin, we'll get to that in a minute, Fingolfin let blow his silver trumpets.
Yes, we will.
And began his march into Middle-earth, and the shadows of his host went long and black before them.
Well, let's tackle that first, actually. The shadows of his host went long and black before them. Mm-hmm. So they're walking from the west,
away
heading
from the
east,
moon. Yeah.
And the shadows of his host went long and black before them. So the moon was behind them.
The moon has risen in the west.
Is risen in the west. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But as we see it,
it's certainly from a metaphorical perspective, it makes sense. Enlightenment comes from the west, Tolkien's world, but obviously it is not the way we see the moon rise.
No.
Or the sunrise.
But it won't stay this way for long. Spoiler alert.
No.
We'll get to the change in the plans here in a little bit, but
yeah.
So this was definitely a pretty long time after the death of the trees, because if this is when Fingolfin's showing up, that means there was enough time for the Noldor to get all the way to the Helcaraxe and to get over the pass, or to get over the strait.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, we don't know exactly how long it was, but we know that crossing took a long time. So this wasn't.
I might be able to look it up in Annals of Aman, but I don't have that handy right now. So.
Oh yeah.
For purposes of the podcast, we won't know.
Yeah, maybe we'll look it up later and post it somewhere. But definitely a long time. It wasn't the next day or anything.
No, this took some time.
Well, I guess it was the next day because they're. Well, no, it wasn't even that. It was maybe the next night.
The next evening, yes.
The first night.
Well done.
Anyway.
So we get. I'm not going to read the next paragraph, but we'll just touch on it. So. The moon goes across 7 times, and when it traverses, it goes back and forth. It goes from the west to the east and back to the west again. It doesn't disappear. It goes it bounces back and forth.
Bounces back and forth. So as soon as it sets in the east, it rises again and goes back to the west.
Right, exactly. So it was in the furthest east now when the sun comes up.
And so let's clarify something. I'm thinking traversed. This word usually just means cross, but I'm thinking a traversal here is a round trip, don't you think? Like when he says traversed 7 times.
No, I don't think so.
Back and forth? You think it's just going...
Because 7 is the only way, or an odd number, is the only way when it would land in the east. If it starts in the west, then on 1 it's in the east, and 2 it's in the west, 3 east, 4 west, 5, 6,
You're right.
7. So on 7 it would be in the east.
See, okay, yes, you're exactly right. See,
Yeah.
that don't let me do math, man. I can't. No, that's exactly
Well, what did I say
right.
last episode? I can't count above 2.
Right. Yeah.
I had to use my fingers for the 7 times. Does that help?
Well, so then this makes me think. I mean, it's so if it's not round trips, then it's not 7 days, is it?
Well, we don't know
It's
how
7.
long. We don't know what
Well,
the time.
that's true. We don't know how fast Tillion's traveling.
Right. We just don't know.
Let's just call it 7 cycles, or not
yeah,
7 cycles.
yeah.
Let's just call it 7 traversals. Let's
Yeah,
say
7 traversals. There we go.
Let's use Tolkien's word. Let's use the word that's
let's
there.
just
in the
go
book.
with what he said. What he said.
I guess the main point is remember this weird bouncing back and forth cycle that we're seeing. Well, and also I want to make sure people are not thinking of this again. We're not thinking of this in modern astronomical terms of the moon completing a revolution around the Earth in 27, 28 days, whatever that is.
No,
this is a across the horizon to horizon.
Right, and there's nothing here about any sort of things like phases. This looks like it would be a
That's
full moon
true.
for 7 passes.
We'll get phases later, won't we?
We will. Well, we'll get something kind of hinting at that. Yeah, I don't think it's described as that, but it talks about like uncertain pace.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah. So so the sun comes up, and of course, boom, big fire on the towers of the mountains. The clouds are kindled. Everything starts happening. I love this, and I'm kind of reaching here. I'm not sure that I'm reaching, actually. With the arrival of the sun, it says the clouds were kindled. So there was no sun previously to evaporate water. So no water vapor, no clouds. Now, there's nothing that says this conclusively. I'm kind of speculating, but I think my speculations are well-founded. Until now, there had always been clear nights to see Varda's stars. All the previous references to rain, and there are a couple of them. There's a discussion between Manwë and Ulmo, when Manwë is telling Ulmo's upset, and Manwë says, "Hey, don't worry about what Melkor did. Now you get to do this."
Was that Manwë, or was that?
Oh no, it was Iluvatar, because you're right. It was Iluvatar and Ulmo. And then
but he says you're brought closer to Manwë by this,
right? That's why I was thinking Manwë.
Right.
And then there was a discussion between Yavanna and Manwë. When Yavanna is talking about, hey, it was in the song, when you were up there making rain, I had these trees raising their hands.
When you were making it rain.
Make it rain. Oh, man. Manwë's making it rain.
Making it rain.
So,
all right, sorry.
Anyway, but both of those references to rain are in reference to the music only and not to the created actual world.
Which was just the account of what was going to happen.
Exactly. They're referencing the song itself. So I've got to say, at least scientifically, without the sun, in a world in darkness, would have had no rain, because there would have been no way for the water vapors to build up, no clouds.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think what we hear now, and it says here, the clouds were kindled, and there was heard the sound of many waterfalls. I mean, 2 things happened there. One might have been the beginning of rain. The other would have been the thawing of ice that would have then resulted in the flowing of rivers and the sound of waterfalls.
That's a really cool catch. Yeah.
Well,
I've never picked up on that before.
I don't think I'd picked up on it either. But when I was realizing, I don't understand. The clouds were kindled and then the waterfalls. What?
Yeah.
Oh.
I think I was just taking it at face value. I was thinking the clouds kindled, like just lit up. But I mean, there's the idea that the clouds would have been, sort of
started
here. Yeah. I mean, that's
context. Yeah.
And we certainly haven't seen a reference to, as you said, we haven't seen a reference to clouds or rain in the actual course of history yet.
Right. So I may be stretching.
Unless I think it's a good theory. I mean, unless somebody can find a reference, that we're missing, I think it's a really good idea.
It's an interesting thought, one way or the other. But
I like that.
So certainly, with the arrival of the sun, ice would be melted, and those waterfalls would begin, and rains would begin. And so Morgoth, well, like we talked about before, cowards do what cowards do. They hide. When they can't run away, they hide. But I love the line here that he sends forth a great reek and dark cloud to hide his land from the light of the day star.
The light of the day star. I love that. The day star is such a cool word. I just adore it. Yeah.
I mean, granted, it sounds like it might be the next Ford minivan, but Sorry, I just destroyed that for you, didn't I?
You did.
Kind of like Gonerim.
Oh man, no, let's not go there again.
No, not going there again. No, I don't think we ever get that word again. So
yeah,
we're lucky.
Man, Ford Daystar. I drive a Ford Daystar.
Yeah, it probably exists like in Europe or something. It sounds like the European version. But anyway.
So if Arian drives a Daystar, does that mean she's a minivan mom?
She's a minivan.
Well, she's not a mom.
Well, she's not a mom, or she's a very bad mom. She's
right.
Kids are stuck with dad in Valinor.
Yeah.
But no, anyway, wow. Talk about digress. Anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting that we get here we get a very specific plan for what the days were supposed to look like. So Varda purposed that the two vessels, we're talking about the sun and the moon, should journey in Ilmen and ever be aloft, but not together. Each should pass from Valinor into the east and return, the one issuing from the west as the other turned from the east. Mm-hmm. So they would go back and forth, bouncing back and forth, passing in midday, and we'll get that in a second. So the first of the new days were reckoned after the manner of the trees from the mingling of the lights, when Arian and Tilion passed in their courses above the middle of the earth. So you might say noon, except that noon also meant that the moon was at the very peak too.
Right.
And so,
actually crossing. Crossing
they're passing each other in opposite directions.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting concept. Certainly one we can't draw a parallel to today.
No. But it's certainly a neat image to think of.
It is. So then,
almost like Tolkien's Green Sun from on Fairy Stories.
You're right.
The imagination that you can have
to actually make that work. So, but Tilion was wayward and uncertain in speed, and held not to his appointed path. He just kept looking at the hot chick, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I get this idea of Tilion being one of Orme's like fraternity brothers. Just like he's probably just like, hey,
Arian, how's it going?
And then maybe she turns her nose up, and then he just like kind of just plays it cool.
Well, he sees her every day on the way to class.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Hey, how's it going? What's up?
And then he starts actually intentionally going that way so that he can pass her.
Exactly. And he slows down a little bit so he can look at her a little bit more.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So he held not to his appointed path, and he sought to come near to Arian, being drawn by her splendor, though the flame of Anar scorched him, and the island of the moon was darkened. So don't get burned, but, that's what he did anyway. That's interesting stuff. This interesting plan of never having night. This was supposed to be a mirror of the light of the trees.
Constant daylight.
Exactly, constant daylight, but not absolutely the same light and quality of light. You'd get
it would have changed.
Only.
Yeah, certainly as the
exactly.
The sun and moon are closer to the horizon because they would have been on opposite horizons at the same time. You'd probably imagine
that must
something
been amazing.
Something closer to twilight, maybe a little darker than high noon. Can you imagine high noon with with a moon and sun in the sky?
Yeah, well, no, I can't imagine.
No, exactly.
Because here in real world land, when the moon is in the sky, it's just a tiny little white thing that doesn't give off any light of its own in comparison to the sun.
Right.
Anyway, you've got the next chapter here because this is important because this is when the plan changes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, because of the waywardness of Tilion, therefore, and yet more because of the prayers of Lorien and Este, who said that sleep and rest had been banished from the earth, and the stars were hidden, Varda changed her counsel, and allowed a time wherein the world should still have shadow and half light. Anar rested therefore a while in Valinor, lying upon the cool bosom of the outer sea. And evening, the time of the descent and resting of the sun, was the hour of greatest light and joy in Aman. But soon the sun was drawn down by the servants of Ulmo, and went then in haste under the earth, and so came unseen to the east, and there mounted the heaven again, lest night be overlong and evil walk under the moon. Right, so that's where
now we get the sun
under
rotating
the earth.
around, right?
Right, so they're going in the same direction.
We still have the flat Earth. We still have the flat Arda.
Right.
But at least now we get a recognizable cycle of the sun.
Right, and it's setting in Aman, so that's in the west. So now
Yeah.
this is the more traditional
East to west.
course of the sun and moon that we're used to. Yeah.
Yep.
But by Anar the waters of the outer sea were made hot and glowed with colored fire, and Valinor had light for a while after the passing of Arion. Yet as she journeyed under the earth and drew towards the east, the glow faded, and Valinor was dim. And the Valar mourned then most for the death of Laurelin. At dawn, the shadows of the mountains of defense lay heavy on the blessed realm.
And indeed they would, because the sun would be rising in the east.
The sun would be rising in the east, so yeah, it would be this
shadows. You'd be in shadow for a long time.
Jagged shadow over. I mean, these are the
huge
tallest
mountains.
On the earth.
Much taller than anything we can imagine.
Yeah, just imagine this jagged shadow over Valinor. Wow.
That really is. I thought this is interesting. Lorien and Este, sleep and rest and dreams say, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. And I love that they changed the mind of Arda by counsel, not by force. But,
right. Yeah, exactly.
They changed her mind, and they said, okay, let's let's do something different. And I mean,
well, it's the sun is important, but the earth needs darkness sometimes.
We do. We need rest.
And that reminds me of the Verlyn Flieger quote.
Doesn't it?
That there's a purpose for both darkness and light. But again, that's not to say that we shouldn't appreciate the light more.
No.
The other thing I think of is the idea that they lamented the fact that the stars were hidden. And I just think about all the things that stars represent for Tolkien. There's the light, and we've talked about mythopoeia and how stars represent myth and
they're not
enlightenment.
Just balls of material, floating through with atoms dying.
Yeah, and just I don't know. I get the idea that stars were very important to Tolkien. Yeah. And the idea that the stars were hidden and that was a problem. That's I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but
well, I find it interesting that Varda is the one who is willing to do that. I mean, Varda is the one who created the stars in the first place, and yet she was willing to allow the stars to be really drowned out. Her own work.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But I'm grateful for Lorien and Este in this case because, I wouldn't want a 24/7 bright sun.
Yeah,
that would be a little bit much. So, yeah. But it is interesting that, of course, they mourn every day. They mourn the passing of Laurelin.
Oh, yeah, and it's just such this beautiful image, haunting image that they
sunset.
Mourn it. They mourn it. Yeah, it's a beautiful sunset, but that's the reminder that, Laurelin is dead, and they're reminded of this every day.
Every day.
And one thing I love about this is, so they're sad at sunset, and they're also sad at dawn because the shadows are lying heavy.
Yeah.
It's almost like they need some other light in the sky that would shine in the west at evening and in the east at morning, like maybe a star that's a symbol of hope.
Or something? I don't know.
Yeah, a morning star, evening star, some sort of symbol of hope. I don't know. Maybe they'll have to work on that.
Oh goodness, Sean, that was subtle.
You like that?
Yeah, I do.
A little bit, maybe a little bit.
Well played. Well, so just to go on after that wonderful little foreshadowing of,
and for those who haven't read the book before, I'm sorry, you'll
understand it. You already know that there's something.
You'll understand pretty soon. Yeah.
Yeah, it won't be too long.
No,
it'll be sometime before the end of the year. Maybe.
Yeah.
No, probably not.
Probably not.
So, so the moon is designed to do the same thing. So Varda says to the moon, basically, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go under the earth, rise in the east, but only after the sun had gone down. So the plan, even now, the plan is somewhat of a symmetrical thing. The sun goes down, the moon comes up. And then the moon goes down as the sun comes up.
But, so there would always be one in the sky, only one in the sky. And
only
they would sort of
and
the same course, kind of like you can imagine, you can imagine both of them kind of moving together in a very synchronized fashion.
As though there was some sort of, pole between them.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Keeping them the exact distance apart and that kind of thing. Keeping them 180 degrees apart. But Tilion being the frat boy that he was with Orome, he and still wanting to get closer to Arion.
Hey, she's hot.
Literally.
Yeah.
So that often both may be seen above the earth together, Or at times, this is interesting, it will chance that he comes so nigh that his shadow cuts off her brightness, and there is a darkness amid the day. I love that he accounts for eclipses.
Yeah.
And times that we see the
and times that we see the moon in the daylight. Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
It's so cool. I know. I love it. I really love this myth. I really do.
I can't blame you. It is beautiful. But, it's funny. It almost didn't come to be. We're going to do a little bit of a sidebar here. I want to pull up a text from Morgoth's Ring. This is from a chapter called Myths Transformed. We talked a little earlier about, when we talked about the question that Bernat sent in about Pangea, that Tolkien did have a desire to try to make his mythology consistent with reality.
Right.
That became a little bit of an issue with this, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how can we have sun or moon for all this time before the elves, when the elves were around?
Well, and I want to linger on that for a moment. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, and I think we talked about it earlier, but, there's a perception out there that Tolkien was, anti-science, or, he certainly was critical of progress.
Well, right. Certainly progress for progress's sake, definitely.
Right. But he wasn't, he was a scholar, he wasn't some Luddite, who just wanted to pretend that this was, the year 1200.
Yeah.
He did.
He wasn't really a flat earther.
Right. Exactly. It's a good way of putting it. Yeah. He wasn't. He was troubled by the fact that his myth was not consistent with scientific reality. He was more troubled by it than I am troubled by it.
Oh, far more. Yeah.
Because he wanted that truth. But anyway, I think it's worth mentioning because I think there's just this idea of Tolkien. He was critical of the modern age, but don't take that too far. He understood that we are, creatures of the modern age. But anyway,
yeah,
continue.
No, I absolutely agree. And that's important because, what he didn't like about that modern science approach to things was how it dismissed myth.
Right, exactly.
This is his whole thing about...
You said a moment ago, the idea that a star is just...
Right, a star is a star, some matter in a ball, contained, of course, is mathematical, with the atoms dying. It's not... It's more than that. It's much more than that.
Exactly.
And in this case, he wanted it to be consistent, but he still wanted it to be a beautiful mythology. So I'm going to pull up some text from Morgoth's Ring. This is actually a quote from Tolkien. This is a note that was written on one of the typescripts to another piece in the history of Middle-earth.
Yeah, and I'm going to apologize here if there's some paper rustling here because I'm going to a hard copy here as well.
Okay. So. Yeah. Well, we there's no ebook to all of these. That's for sure.
No.
So Christopher Tolkien says that this would date to 1958 or later. So this is not way back when. This is much later after the most of the Silmarillion had been written. So Tolkien says that this descends from the oldest forms of the mythology, when it was still intended to be no more than another primitive mythology, though more coherent and less savage. It was consequently a flat earth cosmogony, much easier to manage anyway. The matter of Numenor had not been devised. This is key right here. It is now clear to me that in any case, the mythology must actually be a mannish affair. Men are really only interested in men and in men's ideas and visions. The High Eldar, living and being tutored by the demiurgic beings, he's talking about the Valar, must have known, or at least their writers and lore masters must have known, the truth, according to their measure of understanding. And then he goes on to say that what we have in the Silmarillion are these traditions handed on by men in Numenor and later in Middle-earth, but already far back, blended and confused with their own mannish myths and cosmic ideas. So they're traditions about elvish people, Feanor, for example, but they're written by men and handed down by men. So yes, we're reading an elvish history, but we're reading an elvish history as it has been told to and then written down by repeatedly by men. So it has been blended with their own myths. Is Tolkien's sort of way of justifying why this
dealing with
fit.
So that this idea, this sort of flat Earth story that we get in this chapter, would have been something that men had interpolated later,
right?
Just that they'd come up with on their own before they knew the truth, and the Eldar would have known the truth, but
right, they would have, because the Valar would have known the truth. The Valar were there when the Sun and Moon were there. They had to have been.
Right. It raises an interesting question of transmission, the transmission of the document, of the record.
I love that, how he always has some fascinating fiction behind the transmission.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's the Red Book of Westmarch.
Right. Exactly.
And the various versions of the story that Bilbo said, there's some older versions still floating around.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I love that. Creating a fictional framework is beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's interesting. I mean, we really need to amend something that we said. I think we even said this as recently as the last episode, where we talked about the fact that the Silmarillion is a document from the elves' perspective. It's actually from the elves' perspective, but then later amended by men.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was accurate but limited. We were talking about it being an elvish history in the sense that it wasn't a history of men. Right. But it certainly is a history, written and transmitted by men. Right. Because we're men. We have it, right? If we are to believe that we have this from that time, it must have gotten to men's hands at some point. Exactly. So, it's interesting that it's that this idea is there, that sort of things get lost in translation a little bit. That's exactly what he's saying, and he even talks about this. He says at that point, this point where he's trying to figure out what to do with the cosmogony, in reconsideration of these early cosmogonic parts, I was inclined to adhere. He was actually going to stick with it. He goes, I was inclined to adhere to the flat Earth and the astronomically absurd business of the making of the sun and moon. He's so hard on himself sometimes. He is. He's hard on himself. He really is. So he knows that this is astronomically absurd. Mm-hmm. And I love what he says here. He says, you can make up stories of that kind when you live among people who have the same general background of imagination, when the sun really rises in the east and goes down in the west. When, however, no matter how little most people know or think about astronomy, when, however, it is the general belief that we live upon a spherical island in space, you cannot do this anymore. Mm-hmm. So he knows that he has to change it. Christopher Tolkien goes on, let's see. Actually, this is still Professor Tolkien's words, I think, at this point. Let me just make sure. Nope, this is Christopher Tolkien. That's one of the hard things with History of Middle-earth is knowing when who's talking when. Right. So Christopher Tolkien says, the conclusion of this brief statement appears then to be a further and unconnected step, that the cosmological myth of the Silmarillion was a creative error on the part of its maker, since it could have no imaginative truth for people who know very well that such an astronomy is delusory. So, he goes on to say that Tolkien had come to believe that the art of the sub-creator cannot, or should not attempt to, extend to the mythical revelation of a conception of the shape of the earth and the origin of the lights of heaven that runs counter to the known physical truths. Yeah. In other words, it's got to be consistent with what people know to be true. Otherwise, it breaks that secondary belief, doesn't it? And then you're back to suspension of disbelief, which is exactly what he doesn't want. Sun, but not in a way that's believable. Right. Yeah. And so, that's just to show some of the struggles that he had. I think you've got a quote from a letter, right? That I thought also addresses that. Yeah, I did. It's actually in letter 131, and it's without getting into the details of the nature of the sun and the moon in this early version, but one of the things that gets lost in this other version is the idea that the sun is sort of a second best thing. And the way Tolkien put it it's in letter 131, which is actually in the preface to the Silmarillion. He says, a marked difference here between these legends and most others is that the sun is not a divine symbol, but a second best thing. And the light of the sun, the world under the sun, become terms for a fallen world and a dislocated, imperfect vision. That's perfect for him, though, because he doesn't want the sun to be a divine symbol like it would be in so many other world religions. Right, and that to me is one of the things that's so incredible about it. I mean, this is the sun we're talking about. This is, the most important, the life-giving, source of all energy, on our planet, on Arda. And Tolkien's, the version that's in the Silmarillion, reminds us that it is a second best thing. It's just it's a substitute. Laurelin, it's only one light from Laurelin, right? Right, exactly. And actually that passage is quoted right here in the Morgoth's Ring as well. But I'd kind of picked up on it before we even started looking into Morgoth's Ring, because it's as we'll see when we get back to the Silmarillion, this idea that it's
a second best thing is really, really key to, I think, not only the cosmology of his world, but also, the ethical and the, kind
yeah.
of the sort of the moral philosophy of his world. And I think some of that was lost in his effort to kind of create a more scientifically accurate version.
That's true.
Yeah.
There's a little bit that I read in, I don't know if you're familiar with Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull's Reader's Guide. I don't know if you've ever read that or looked at it. That's the one that's done by topics. It's not the, there's another guide. I can't remember what it's called.
There's the Lord of the Rings guide, like
right.
the Lord of the Rings companion.
That's more like, that's a companion. That's an excellent volume. That's like,
I have that one.
It's like annotations.
I have that one, but I don't have the Reader's Guide.
The Reader's Guide is a topical breakdown, and it's interesting. When you look this topic up, Sun and Moon or something like that, I think it was, there's a quote here. Of course, it kind of says what we just talked about, that when he returned to the Silmarillion after publishing The Lord of the Rings, he contemplated radical changes to the cosmology of his legendarium, by which the Sun and Moon would have existed from the beginning of Arda. So he did consider making it more consistent with reality. But he wanted to preserve a couple fundamental aspects of the version of the work that we do see in the Silmarillion. That the light of the two trees was purer than that of the sun and moon, that the sun is a secondary light, and that after the destruction of the trees, that light was only preserved in the Silmarils. And he also wanted to preserve this notion of the elves awaking by starlight. And I thought, because we talked about the importance of that, and how, because of that, they always revered Varda.
They always called to Varda at need,
Yeah. So
Elbereth Gilthoniel,
absolutely. So anyway, that was a little. There wasn't a lot in Skull and Hammond, but that Reader's Guide is a handy little thing for certain individual topics, I will say. So.
Yeah. So again, Tolkien was always very critical of his own work.
Always, very much.
And so, I mean, I feel like this is one place where I love the version that we've got here in the Silmarillion, and I appreciate him wanting to reconsider it a little bit, but man, I wouldn't change a thing about this chapter.
That's the thing. I wouldn't either. I'm glad he did. There was a quote, I think, if I can find it, where Christopher Tolkien himself talked about this being so hard to do. If I can find it here. I probably won't be able to find it. It was something about how it couldn't really be reconciled properly, and he tried to figure out how to include it in this book, but it never really fit.
Right. I know the one you're talking about, and I'm trying to find it.
I know. I can't believe I don't have that somewhere. Oh well.
Yeah, I know.
The idea is, of course, just that that it's not of a piece with the rest of the work.
Right.
And it could not be made to be so, I think was what he said. If I can, if I'm paraphrasing, I apologize, but I think it's fairly close to what he'd said.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the Silmarillion, right?
Indeed, yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and take this next paragraph then. Let's see.
We got still therefore.
So before that though, we do need to at least point out that now they're reckoning the days by the sun, the coming and going of the sun.
Oh, yes.
So now we end the Valinorian years.
Yeah.
And days are now measured in our standard 24-hour days, 365-day years.
Right. And I think we usually see this referred to as the ages of the sun beginning. Mm-hmm. It's still the first age, but it's it's now considered part of the ages of the sun.
The first age goes back to before the trees, right?
Right.
The first age goes back to the creation of Arda. The creation of Ea itself. But it's now we go from the measure, the years of the trees to the years of the sun.
Yep.
So still, therefore, after the long night, the light of Valinor was greater and fairer than upon Middle Earth, for the sun rested there, and the lights of heaven drew nearer to earth in that region. But neither the sun nor the moon can recall the light that was of old, that came from the trees before they were touched by the poison of Ungoliant. That light lives now in the Silmarils alone.
Mm-hmm.
As we talked about, that was really key. That's something Tolkien wanted to keep.
Yeah.
And if you were to change this, it'd be very hard to change it and keep that element in there.
It would have changed so much more than just this origin story. It would have changed, just the nature of...
Because the trees would have had to have been secondary from the sun. instead of the other way around.
Right.
So
yeah. I'm again, I'm so glad he kept it like it is. This idea of the light, the Silmarils and the sun and moon both being, different variations on the light that came from the trees, but the Silmarils being purer.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of reminds me of some of Tolkien's own words. Just the idea of the refracted light from Mythopoeia. I don't know,
the many hues and
Yeah. I mean, again, it's not talking about the same thing, but I love the fact that the imagery he uses
language
throughout
comes back.
Yeah, the language comes back. So cool.
So now we've talked about that light. Does Morgoth like the light? Morgoth
hates the light, Alan.
Well, why don't you tell us about that?
Well, right there it says, but Morgoth hated the new lights.
Well, there you have it.
And we're done.
Good night, folks.
Podcast over. And was for a while confounded by this unlooked-for stroke of the Valar. He was surprised by this.
I did it before, I'll do it again.
You did it before, you'll do it again.
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have been surprised by that. I should have known that was coming. An unlooked-for stroke of the system.
Oh, man. All right. Sorry about that. So he was confounded. Morgoth was confounded.
Then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him. And there was strife in Ilmen beneath the paths of the stars. But Tilion was victorious. And Arion Morgoth feared with a great fear, but dared not come nigh her, having indeed no longer the power. For as he grew in malice, and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness, his might passed into them and was dispersed. And he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from his dark strongholds. With shadows he hid himself and his servants from Arion, the glance of whose eyes they could not long endure. And the lands near his dwelling were shrouded in fumes and great clouds.
Wow. Yeah, we get so much here in terms of what we talked about last week about him spending his spirit. Look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes back, yeah.
Yeah, as he grew in malice and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness. That's where he was investing his power.
Right.
So his might passes into those things and was dispersed. And in doing so, that binds him more to the earth.
And he's unwilling to leave his stronghold.
Yeah.
He's cowardly. He's hiding.
Coward, yeah.
Because he knows he doesn't have the strength. He knows he doesn't have the strength to stand up against Arion, so he's going to go for the weaker of the two.
And he doesn't even have the strength to enable his servants to endure the light of Arion.
To endure, yeah.
Because he's the one who determines how strong they are.
That's true, because he's putting his own strength into them, isn't he? So he doesn't even have enough strength to divide amongst his servants to make them strong enough to withstand the light. Wow, the light of the sun. That's really cool.
Yeah. So you're right. He does attack the weak one, right?
Yeah. And this is a really cool idea. It's just a neat image. The spirits of shadow that attacked the moon. But Tilion was victorious. I mean, he was he was sent by the Valar. He's on a to borrow a Blues Brothers reference. He's on a mission from God. Tilion couldn't be defeated by this, and that's really cool.
That really is, and it's a good thing too.
And it is a good thing.
Definitely.
I think. I kind of think that this is hinting at why the moon has phases. I don't know if it's this or if it's
the spirits of shadow.
Yeah, it's. I think
that would imply that it's ongoing. I don't know.
Well, that's true. Maybe the phases probably come more from the burning then, because we talked about how he got too close to got burned.
Got too close and got burned.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Unless that's the man in the moon or something. The
oh right, yeah, like the
textures and coloring of the moon.
Yeah,
I know that's an
but
interesting
at any rate,
one.
so Tilion was victorious, so it does suggest phases would not be ongoing if that was the source of phases.
Right.
But the reaction to Arion I think is really interesting, and you had an insight into his servants, right?
Well,
in like some later books.
Well, right. His orcs could not long endure the sun, so I mean I do wonder though, because eventually they develop the Uruk-hai that can walk around and
actually can, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. We'll have to maybe get to that. The orc thing is another area where he kind of went back and forth on how did they.
What was their nature? Where did they come from?
Their nature, their reproduction ability. Did they because they were from immortal stock? Were they immortal aside from being slain in battle because they were cannon fodder?
Right.
But yeah, it makes me think of things like trolls.
I was thinking that too. Maybe is that why trolls turn to stone in The Hobbit when the sun comes up, right?
Yeah, I mean, they really can't endure the sun.
Right, exactly.
But of course, that's all after Morgoth is gone.
Yeah.
For now, he's just covering his land with a radar jammer. He's got the fumes and great clouds, and so it's always cloudy.
Yeah, he's all about the shadow. I mean,
the Thangorodrim weather forecast is mostly cloudy today.
Mostly cloudy. Yeah.
It's mostly cloudy in Thangorodrim today.
Yeah.
No clearing. Not tomorrow either, or the next day. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, it's
a little weatherman thing that didn't work.
I love it.
It doesn't work when the weather doesn't change.
It's true. But I love this idea that he's bound to the earth. He can't. He doesn't have any power over lights in the sky.
Away.
But he has some power over the earth. He has enough power at least to create shadows and fogs and things like that. And
the fumes and great
that kind of goes back to not getting into this, but the whole nature of Morgoth's ring, of Arda being Morgoth's ring, because he put so much of himself into Arda itself. He put so much of his own corruption into Arda.
Yeah.
In a desire to possess it. But,
absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway.
Well, that's Morgoth's response. So now what is the Valar's response, not to the sun and moon, but to the assault upon the moon? We see in the next paragraph what they do. They get a little worried.
They were taken aback a little bit.
They got, Morgoth again, very powerful. They remember what he did to Almarin in toppling over the lamps. And they decided, look, we're not taking any chances. So they raised the mountains up even higher, sheer and dreadful heights, the text says, east, north, and south. So now it's not just a wall that's facing one direction. It's now a three-sided box. There's mountains in the north and in the south and in the east. And their outer sides, the text says, were dark and smooth without foothold or ledge. So we're talking, like glass. There's no way you're going to get through them. There's only one pass, and that's the Calakiria. They didn't close that because of the faithful Eldar that remained.
I love that.
Isn't that beautiful?
I love the idea that, there were the Eldar that were faithful. And even the Eldar that were in Tirion that was, remember Tirion is behind the Pelori from our perspective. But they they must breathe at times the outer air and the wind that comes over the sea from the lands of their birth. It's just that kind of little reminder of the elven nature. They're creatures of Middle Earth.
Absolutely. And they also didn't want to separate them completely from the Teleri.
Right. That's true. Because Alqualande was on the other side of the Pelori.
So, of course, they made sure that the pass was guarded. Strong towers, many sentinels. A host was encamped.
I wondered about, what kind of sentinels they had. Do you think they had snipers or lasers?
Lasers.
Probably just eagles. Maybe eagles with lasers.
Eagles with lasers. Eagles with lasers. There you go.
Yeah, eagles
mounted
with lasers
on their claws.
Yeah. Right,
okay.
yeah.
I'm sure there's a video game where you can probably upgrade your eagles to like level 3 and they get equipped with lasers or something.
Yeah, laser. I got the laser eagles. I bought the laser eagles upgrade. I got the laser eagles DLC.
It's probably in-app purchases,
Yeah, right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this thing is a fortress. It's it is.
You're not getting in, folks. You are not getting in. And in case that's not enough, let's read that last paragraph. And in that time also, which songs called Nurtale Valinoreva, the hiding of Valinor, the enchanted isles were set, and all the seas about them were filled with shadows and bewilderment. And these isles were strung as a net in the shadowy seas from the north to the south, before Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, is reached by one sailing west. Hardly might any vessel pass between them, for in the dangerous sounds the waves sighed forever upon dark rocks shrouded in mist. And in the twilight a great weariness came upon mariners and a loathing of the sea. But all that ever set foot upon the islands, were there entrapped, and slept until the change of the world. Thus it was that as Mandos foretold to them in Ahriman, the blessed realm was shut against the Noldor. And of the many messengers that in after days sailed into the west, none came ever to Valinor, save one only, the mightiest mariner of song.
And Who exactly is he speaking of there?
I'm pretty sure I had to I don't know, sign over my firstborn to get the right to read that line.
Because
it implies the existence of Eärendil.
Right. I'm not letting you have any other passages about Eärendil for the rest of the podcast. No, of course, that's not true. But yes, of course, he's speaking of my favorite character in the Legendarium, Eärendil.
Yep. Beautiful foreshadowing.
It is beautiful foreshadowing. And that's the reason I made that comment about, the little crack about if only there was a star that shone at evening and at morning.
If only.
Yeah. Because it's it's not accidental, I don't think.
No, not at all.
That he talks about the sadness at dawn and at evening.
I think you're absolutely right.
It's I don't want to spoil the whole story, but those who've read the Silmarillion know what happens on Eärendil's quest. We've talked about the idea that Eärendil is this critical character, really the first character that Tolkien came up with in his Legendarium.
Seminal. Absolutely.
Because of, he's inspired by a line of Old English poetry. And so I think that because Eärendil, as we will see, is the enduring symbol of hope, which is in fact one of the nicknames that they're going to give him is Gil Estel, which is Star of Hope.
That's true.
I just think it's important to know that the redemption, the hope that's going to come at the end, the eucatastrophe, is actually foreshadowed here at the beginning. It's built into the tragedy at the beginning.
It is. So, and that's so consistent with what Tolkien believed. I mean, even the biblical story, what he believed was the ultimate eucatastrophe, that happy ending is built into the dark tragedy at the beginning, the fall. Yeah. And God's response to it is that, is the prophecy of Christ that, I mean, I'm getting far afield if I go too far, but the point is that is how he saw things. That's how Tolkien saw things.
Right,
the bad thing at the beginning already has built into it the good thing that will come from it.
Right,
and that's all I meant to say by that.
Right. No, I understand. And even like here, literally, the fall of the Noldor has just happened. The darkening of the trees has just happened, but already there's redemption on the horizon. And forgive the pun, but literally, I mean,
that's true. That's well said. No, that's not a pun. That's just a beautiful truth. I think there was also a little, you talk about foreshadowing. I thought it was interesting. Slept until the change of the world. I think that's the second time we've seen that phrase, change of the world, in this chapter.
Oh, yeah.
And talk about foreboding. The change of the world. Well, that's an awfully big thing to change. What might that be about? So we'll find out more about that later.
Right.
But wow. For now, that actually does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. Can't believe it, but as always, we thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And join us again in 1 week for a special treat. Alan, you want to do the honors and talk about what's going to happen?
I do, Sean. Thank you. That's right, folks. We are going to be back in just 1 week with a very special bonus episode. We are honored to be welcoming to the podcast Dr. Dimitra Fimi and Dr. Andrew Higgins, the editors of the new edition of Tolkien's A Secret Vice that was published earlier this year. They're going to be joining us next week to talk about the book and answer a few questions.
We're both really looking forward.
We're on the moon about this. Are you kidding? This is huge.
So looking forward to having them here. If you haven't picked up the book yet, please do. A Secret Vice is Tolkien's essay on language invention, and they've recently published it in a new edition with some other essays and some great new commentary by the editors. It's just a fantastic read.
It is, and there's a lot of new content. I remember looking at it. It's probably about 35%, 40% of it is absolutely new content that's never been seen. Yeah,
definitely worth it, and wonderful.
No doubt. Well, as always, folks, if you need cheap paperbacks to mark up or even the new hardcovers of A Secret Vice, please use the links on our library page at theprancingponypodcast.com. We also have links to audiobooks, music CDs, and some other cool things for your Tolkien collection.
And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Google Play Music. We really need iTunes reviews, so please, if you haven't left one, please leave one. We really appreciate your support. We're also on Stitcher and TuneIn, and thanks to those of you who are visiting us and commenting on social media.
Absolutely.
Again, this is The Prancing Pony, and you can join us in the common room at Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, or on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod.
And social media is a great place to share our podcast as well. So please retweet us and share us. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, Tell that guy you went to high school with who's posting political stuff you don't like. Okay, maybe not that guy.
Maybe not that guy, yeah.
Please, no. And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or your sunscreen recommendations for Arian to the prancingponypodcast@gmail.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, an hour 40 is still too far short a time to spend among such admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.